Hello everybody, and welcome back to the Celestial Perch. Today I'll be going over another basic build. This one is focused a little bit more on early military expansion. After I complete this basic build, my next video will be a little bit more focused on what's coming out in the new patch. But compared to my two previous builds, the first one being kind of a Unity Rush build with terrible audio quality, and another build kind of based more around new or beginning players. This one is more for your average to intermediate player, someone with a little bit more experience with Stellaris, someone who's looking maybe to play a little bit more with the military expansion and just kind of domination style of gameplay. But without further ado, let's jump right into it and start from the top. Of course, we've chosen one of our holy avians. This guy is kind of cool. He has a little mustache and cool brow. I'll eventually do like a tier list of the avians at some point. There are some that I like more than others, but they are my favorite. And species name, we've randomized. Name list, just chose one of the random avian ones. And traits. Here's kind of the start of the build. I'm not going to go over Clone Soldier right away. I'll jump back into that when we get to Origin. But we'll start with free pick, Unruly. As I mentioned before, it's basically just a free 2 points. Nothing too crazy here, just very useful. And then Solitary. As you've seen before, I usually pick Sedentary, but in my opinion, both are fine. 1 point traits. Rarely ever run into pop housing issues. And if you do, you can always just build more city districts. It's not the end of the world. Next, we'll go into Industrious and Strong, and a possible replacement for Strong as well. But first, Industrious. Minerals are very useful. With this build, Clone Army, you will have a lot of pops. I'll explain once we get to Origin how that works, but you will have a lot of pops to fill a lot of jobs, and the cost of building districts and buildings would be minerals. So we're trying to take advantage of some extra minerals, and Industrious helps us do that. Strong, also, to a lesser degree, helps us do that. Gives us 2.5% extra worker pop resource output, which includes minerals. It's admittedly weak. If you're looking for something a bit stronger, go with natural engineers. Engineering is the best type of research, and it pairs very well with our last trait, which is intelligent. With all these extra pops, we'll have a lot of extra specialists, and all of the specialists, or at least a lot of them, on our capital will be researchers, so having an extra 10% of that is pretty nice. Name and class, as I mentioned before, we're going to try to focus a little bit heavier on minerals, especially in the early game, so having alpine worlds, or in this case frozen worlds, will give us a slightly higher chance to see those mining districts. City appearance, not very important, I just chose avian. And moving on to kind of the crux of the build, the most important aspect, Clone Army. So how Clone Army works in kind of just a very quick explanation. You have ancient clone vats, which you start with 2 of them on your homeworld. Each of them can produce, I admittedly haven't played Clone Army in a second, but I believe it's 20 each. So your homeworld will get up to 40. And then once you're over 40, it will start to decline back to 40. And you can build, as it says here, up to 5. So there's kind of 2 ways you can approach this, where you obviously have your 2 guaranteed habitable worlds, and if that's all you have, then if you have one that is larger than the other, you can put that extra clone vat on that one, so you have 2 in your capital, 2 on the large planet, and only 1 on the smaller planet. If you happen to run into another planet that you can colonize, then maybe split 1 between each. Those are kind of the 2 approaches that I've used in the past that work relatively well for me. And lastly, their Clone Army Admirals have 25% additional ship fire rate and 10% reduced ship upkeep, which just means you can field a larger fleet and they shoot faster, which we'll go over later. But for now, back to traits. Clone Soldier, the trait that you get for taking Clone Army. You get Governing Ethics Attraction plus 50%, Um, it's actually very good, governing ethics attraction. I'm going to make a video in the future going very, very in depth into governing ethics extraction and how it works and just why it's useful. And then you also get plus 50% army damage. Just means that your armies are better than other armies. They do more damage, so you don't need as many of them to land and take over planets. Um, it stacks with strong, but as I mentioned before, strong is kind of redundant in this build. I just took it so that it wasn't a pure meta build. It's not a pure meta build, but just so that you kind of have something to kind of pick and remove as needed, and strong is kind of that. Industrious to a lesser degree, you can also pick and remove and replace with something else, but strong is just something that you can kind of mix and match, because Clone Army kind of already does what strong does, but better. Those are the traits and origins, though. Overall, Clone Army is just very powerful, netting you a lot of population early. Those ancient cloning vats churn out, well, the clone pops very, very quickly. Oh, I forgot. One last thing to mention with a clone soldier is the leader lifespan is reduced by 40 years. It's the only negative modifier here that you can see, aside from cannot reproduce naturally and cannot be genetically modified. So it's important to choose traits that you want. And then also with the 40-year reduction, normally your leaders will live to 80, and then after 80, they have a percent chance to die each month, which means they usually make it to about 88, 89. With clone soldiers, that occurs at 40. And your leaders, I believe, spawn anywhere from 1 to 20 years of age, usually somewhere within the 10 to 15 range. So it's not as big of a deal as it seems. Your leaders aren't spawning at 39 and then dying a year later. That this isn't an overtuned build, uh, but it's actually not too bad. Even though it says 40 and that's half of what it normally is, you should be well on your way to conquering your first neighbor by the time your leaders start dying. So that's the origin, and we'll try to move through the ethics, authority, and civics pretty quickly. We take fanatic militarist because extra ship fire rate is powerful, stacked quite nicely with the Clone Army origin. And we take materialist, more so for the research speed. You can replace this with something like egalitarian is kind of a fun one as well. You get some extra unity gain from your factions and additional specialist pop resource output. So I would say maybe somewhere between these two is fine. You also have the options, of course, of spiritualist. That's another good one. We've taken oligarchic. Gives us a little bit of extra unity gain, which is nice, and it gives us access to meritocracy. Meritocracy gives us leader level cap, which is passable. More importantly, specialist pop resource output plus 10%. That is a extremely good bonus, and you can pair that with egalitarian, and pair that more so with the Clone Army origin, which gives us a lot of pops very quickly in the early game, which means we can fill a lot more specialist resource jobs, being stuff like alloys, consumer goods, research, and we get 10% on top of that with meritocracy, which is very powerful. And lastly, personally chosen Distinguished Admiralty. Pretty good. We get extra ship fire rate, 10%, additional admiral level cap, which means it goes just a bit higher, and some fleet command limit, which means at the start of the game, you can fill up your first fleet to 30 instead of 20. Pretty nice. Also, your admirals in general start at level 3. May not seem like a lot, but it's actually it's 9% additional fire rate compared to the usual, which is, I believe, you just start with a level 1 admiral, which is 3. This is 9. So you almost have 20% fire rate from just Distinguished Admiralty, which is pretty nice, pairing that especially with Fanatic Militarist, and then the Clone Army Origin, very powerful overall. Ship fire rate's pretty self-explanatory. If you have two ships of equal shields, equal armor, equal weapons, if your ship is firing for the opponent's ship, it will destroy it before it can destroy yours. So it can very quickly turn the tide of a fight. Advisor voice, normally it'll be on militarist. I would recommend changing off of that to materialist or just whatever else you want.
Democracy sure is an endless struggle.
Something. Militarist is just a bit rough on the ears. Empire name, randomized. Flag, also got randomized. Pretty cool. Kind of panned out. And then ship appearance, went with avian. Even though avian's my favorite species, it's not my favorite ship set. It's kind of weird looking, but overall it's fine. And then ruler, of course, doesn't really matter too much. Lastly, when we're starting the game, just kind of choose whatever default settings you want. Usually leave them primarily on default, trying to change it too much. Adjust the crisis strength and difficulty according to your skill level. And then the only thing I can recommend, which I'll probably try to recommend in every video, is just at least xenocompatibility and L-gates will be turned off if you struggle with performance. I've also noticed that turning off the L-gates kind of improves the AI's pathing. Sometimes they will path through really weird ways when they go through the L-gates. And lastly, Caravaneers. It says they offer you great deals, but they offer you great deals a lot, and it can get kind of annoying. So I usually turn it off. But that is the Clone Army Origin kind of early game aggression build. Clone Army, as you'll come to find out after playing this, is very, very powerful. I at first didn't play it for a while because didn't really interest me, but after I played it, I enjoyed it quite thoroughly, and I think you will too. Tune in soon, either later today or sometime later this week or weekend. I'm going to release a few videos on kind of my first impressions of the new patch, and especially the psionic side of things. I really enjoy the psionic, so I think I'll start there. Look at the new ascension paths, see how those work, and kind of give my first thoughts. But thank you for tuning in, and have a blessed day.